Hey everybody, welcome back. So in today's video, I wanted to talk about a pretty interesting topic. Since we talk about on this channel a lot about mental illnesses and certain things that kind of go with it, well, one of the things I feel like I haven't mentioned in a lot of my videos is from somebody with mental illness, how do you talk to people who don't understand mental illness and maybe they want to know more about it or there's certain stigma going on? Like, how do you communicate that to somebody who just genuinely doesn't understand? So that's what I wanted to talk about in today's segment. If you're somebody who deals with mental illness, at some point you're going to probably come across at least one person who doesn't know very much about mental illness. Like, they hear about it, but there's still so much stigma about it. There's always these movies that portray mental illness, and some of them can be quite accurate, but some of them are also still very biased because maybe they're more fictional, or they had certain parts of it that weren't very realistic. Like, they make it look like the person was cured or got better super quickly. And for anybody who has mental illness, you know things in movies like that, they don't happen like that. And maybe they had to happen that way in a movie to make it, because you can only show so much time in like a 1-2 hour movie versus real life. But more than likely, this is something that's going to come across to really a lot of people. And addressing it can be very difficult because there are people that are very understanding about it, and then there's people that are very not understanding about it, and that's when it gets really irritating. So let's say you talk to somebody and they really don't understand something like, for all intents and purposes, I'll use bipolar disorder as an example, since I know a lot more about that one than some of the other ones. There's a lot of stigma with that one that I've heard about throughout my life that gets, really gets on my nerves after a while. And I get it, not everybody understands it. We're all human. You learn more about things by getting educated. Makes sense. So one of the common stereotypes that goes along with bipolar disorder is people think it's a minute-by-minute thing. 1 minute you're happy, 1 minute you're sad, then you're angry, or you're flipping out on people for no reason, or every time you're manic, it's like you're just walking through a meadow full of roses, and you're just picking all the flowers, and you're just so happy, and it's like you're just like walking on sunshine or something. And although it can feel pretty euphoric, it also can be very dysphoric because there's different types of mania, and it's different for every person. Yeah. So those are a lot of kind of stereotypes that go on with bipolar disorder that get very annoying. So if I have, we'll just say Sally. Well, let's say my friend Sally kind of comes up to me and maybe maybe she doesn't even know I'm bipolar, or maybe she does know, and then she says something offhand like, oh, you seem really bipolar today because, you were just fine a minute ago, now you're in a bad mood. Well, one of the things I've really kind of found myself doing, obviously as kindly as possible, is kind of letting the person know, like in this case Sally, like, hey, that's not really how that works. And assuming that this Sally person in my example is a pretty open-minded person, hopefully she'll take the time to kind of be like, oh, wait, that's not how that works? Like, you're not like manic right now? Or, okay, you were fine earlier, now you're all over the place, you're not like manic right now? No, it's not usually that, it's not that quick. The episodes tend to last a lot longer than that, and there's a lot more symptoms than just having energy and being hyper and stuff. So, assuming that she's somebody that would want to know more about the matter, it would be easy to see how, like, oh, well, I'm sorry, I just saw it in a movie and I thought yours was like that, and maybe she genuinely didn't mean it like that. But then, of course, there's the people that are a lot more cruel, and maybe they don't even care if they're stereotyping, because if it's kind of like rumors or one person hears about it, then everybody else kind of goes along with it. Maybe they don't care to fact check it or see if there's any relevant data to back it up or anything. And then that's when things just get really irritating, because sometimes you just can't reason with people, and you're just better off associating yourself with people who are more healthier for you and less toxic environment. But yeah, so in a situation like that, I would feel like it would be, like in my case, it would be more beneficial if they really didn't know, and if it was a genuine mistake, that could be easily corrected, but again, that's not always the case. And throughout my experience with mental illness, I do know that there's going to be questions about things, and I honestly really welcome questions, and that's what I wanted to bring in my next example, is encouraging people to ask questions, because even though you could have, like, hopefully not all too close together, but cumulatively, if you've had, like, let's say, I'll just say a whole bunch of people ask you the same question, and, like, if we're still using bipolar disorder as an example, if I have a lot of people that ask me like why I talk so fast or why my voice is so intense, if they know I have bipolar disorder, they may not know that's part of it, or they may not know I have it at all. And then that's kind of when I get into the awkward explanation of like, hey, I have pressured speech when I get really revved up, and that's like when my voice sounds like this and everything. And I don't really mind that so much now that I'm older. I think a lot of the times it mainly just got on my nerves if it turned into something like, if somebody was curious about it, that's one thing. But if it turned into them like mocking me or making fun of me, or they like were asking me some really mean questions like, oh, are you on drugs, or are you on speed? Oh, I'd like to get some of that. Like, where'd you get that from? Like, that's when things get really hurtful and really tedious. And that's when stigma involving mental disorders and just mental illness gets extremely frustrating, because if you're somebody who deals with something like that and you hear that from so many people, it gets so repetitive and it makes people sound really callous even if they don't mean it like that. So that can be an example that's a little bit harder to deal with. But of course, again, going back to that situation, if they just want to ask me a genuine question about that, like, oh, you seem to talk really fast, why is that? Then I have no problem telling them why. And then if they want to know more about the mania that causes that, or even anxiety can cause that too, you actually learn quite a lot of things from people like that who have diseases who are very open about it. And that's why, really, throughout my experience, I've always tried my hardest to be open about it, because people aren't going to learn more about these things if people just keep it to themselves. Like, you want to get the information out there, and you don't want to be too biased about it, because everybody's experience is different, and I know that. My experience with bipolar disorder and anxiety is not going to be the same as somebody else's, and I keep that in mind on a regular basis. And that's why if I do meet another person who has mental illness like me, I mean, it could be really anything, but especially if it's bipolar disorder, and that's the one I'm more accustomed to talking about, that's the one I'm more used to dealing with on a regular basis. I mean, I will ask them questions like, hey, what is your mania like? Do you have type 1 like I do, or do you have type 2? Or do you know which type you have? Or have you been diagnosed? Do you have one of the more, like cyclothymic disorder, where it's not really as more well known, but it is a subtype of bipolar that's kind of considered to be more mild than type 1 or type 2? And if it's somebody who's like really done their research about it, and then they know a lot about it too because they have the same disorder, you can kind of compare and contrast your experiences and maybe how you got treatment, because obviously the medications I'm on aren't going to be the same as somebody else's. Or maybe if they're in certain types of treatment, because they could have other co-occurring disorders, like I have anxiety with it, but they could have PTSD, they could have schizophrenia, and it, again, that could be how their experience is different from mine. So again, really encourage people to ask questions, even if it's a little bit annoying, and you don't have to give them your whole life story, but I mean, that is how people are going to learn about things like that. And if we ever want to get to a point where we get rid of stigma, part of it is going to start not only with educating people, but part of educating people is answering questions, hopefully as accurately as possible. And the funny thing is, you're not always going to be in the mood to answer people's questions, and that's perfectly fine, which leads me to my next point. My next point, assuming that you're getting these from valid areas and everything, again, kind of do your research appropriately, is if you don't want to answer questions about maybe your mental disorder or your experiences, because maybe they're more personal, maybe you've had more trauma in your life, or maybe, again, you just don't want to give your whole life story, you can always give people really, really useful resources where they can look up information on their own time. And obviously, I don't want it to be, like, metaphorically speaking, like throwing a big old book in somebody's lap. I'm just saying that there are very useful resources out there for people to do research, to ask questions, where they can learn such very helpful information, not only for people who have the disorder, but if they have loved ones, and or maybe if they're doing some, like, a school project for, like, mental illness. I mean, there's so much valid information out there, so many helpful resources, especially if you have access to internet, or even if you have, like, a local library. I mean, information is so much power, just like knowledge is. And that's why, especially as I get older and I learn more about the world, I just can't emphasize enough how important education is and access to it, because I feel like one of the main issues with really a lot of areas, a lot of topics, is having access to the information that goes with it. And even having access to that information would really just help in so many areas. Because then doing things like eliminating stigma is not going to happen overnight, and I hope someday it does get better. I feel like it's getting better, but it's a very slow process. So really, just kind of showing people where these kind of things are. I mean, not everybody has access to internet, not everybody's tech savvy, not everybody knows where their local library is. Some people may not even be able to read as proficiently as the next person might, and that can be embarrassing to talk about for some people. And even though there's information out there to kind of really help with things like this, where exactly the information itself is located is not always well known, and that can be a very, very big barrier in eliminating stigma and teaching people more about mental illness. And one of the things really kind of going with all of this, like really wanting to teach people about mental illness, whether it's yours or just in general, really having patience with the person too, because if you're somebody with mental illness, more than likely you're going to want somebody to be patient with you, because it's going to be different in your day-to-day life doing certain tasks, communication with people. People aren't mind readers. They don't know what your life is like with mental illness. So, assuming that they're granting you that patience, really be sure you reciprocate that and you grant patience to those people as well, because maybe they are trying to learn about your mental illness or about it in general, but if they don't have anybody in their family that has it, or maybe they don't work in a field like healthcare where they see a lot of it, they might just honestly be very sheltered to it. And sometimes, unless people observe things from their own eye, they can't help but be a little bit naive. And nobody wants to have the mentality that, oh, because I haven't seen it, it doesn't exist. Well, I mean, maybe they'll see it at some point, but if they're at least willing to learn about it first, that's usually a good step in the right direction. So, like I said, really be sure if somebody is showing interest in that, and if you're trying to explain something like that to people, be sure you give them patience. And plus, if it's like learning anything, you're not going to know it all in one day, because it is a lot of information. Like, you might learn about depression first, but then when you learn about all these other mental illnesses, there's quite a few of them out there, and there's still more research that needs to be done in the areas as well, and that is also probably another barrier, because I think once we learn more about this stuff in the future, that'll also help with the access and the education and really getting it out there. And since I had mentioned communication earlier in that last little tidbit, yes, that's another good one as well, because like I said, people aren't mind readers. Really, like, especially if it's somebody you work with, if there's ways that they can help you, make your job easier, ways that they can accommodate you or people in your family, if they can be patient with you, if you're, like, depressed and you're having a hard time getting yourself going and just kind of getting your routine started the way you normally would. Sometimes when people know more about things like that, they know how to help you more, and that can help with communication, and that's a very important aspect in many, many areas of life, because nobody's ever been a mind reader, and that's not really about to change anytime soon. And plus, even if somebody does know something, you don't always know that somebody knows something either. So really just keeping open communication with people can really, really help with that in a lot of different ways. So as you can imagine with this video, I've been feeling pretty revved up lately, and I haven't really slept, so I'm sorry if this video is kind of all over the place, but this is a video I really wanted to make and kind of converse about, because like I said, this is a very important topic, and there's always going to be people that don't know things. So although it can be frustrating and you'd really just have a hard time with it, don't be afraid to be patient with people and to educate people and really help eliminate this stigma in the world, because mental illness is real. It's a very important thing to talk about. Keep on talking about it, because it's very important. But even if you have rough days, we keep in mind the people around you, even if they don't have mental illness, they have rough days too, and I'm sure they want to help you and understand you because they care about you. So, until next time, have a great day, guys.